Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our special live session for week 10, Friday night, 5 o'clock. Here we are again. And today we're going to be talking about croissant a little bit. I'm going to answer any questions for you guys. And then we're going to talk about sourdough a little bit too. And class is going to be ending soon on December the 17th. So it'll be here before we know it. And this is our second to last live session, our special live session. So we're going to meet again next Friday the 13th, but after that, we won't be able to meet because after class is over, the site's going to be shut down. All right, so we'll talk sourdough a little bit this week, and we can talk about it next week and anything, next week that you guys need clarified from the class. And I'm going to put up an extra credit assignment at the bottom of the class page, and that can be any bread that you want to make that we haven't done so far in class. So if you want to do extra credit, you can do that as well. And I just wanted to, before I forget, Chef Susie forgets about things sometimes, but if anyone has makeup work, please start getting that in. I talked to a couple of people and about makeup work, and they told me, oh, I have that one, I just have to submit it. So better submit it sooner, and then you can see your grade go up. So makeup work is any assignments that you have missed. So class is ending on December 17th, which is a Tuesday. And your assignment, finishing week assignment, and all makeup assignments have to be in by that time. But starting today, if anyone submits makeup assignments before December 15th, Sunday at 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time, I will take a late penalty off one of your late assignments for you. Okay, so if for every makeup assignment that you submit, I'll take off one late penalty on another assignment for you. So kind of an incentive to get those makeup assignments in early, and also so we can get them graded and you can see your grade go up, and then you can get some extra points too as well. So that's starting today until December 15th, which is Sunday. So any makeup assignments that come in within that window, I'll take off late penalties off other assignments for anyone. Okay, so I'll put a note up too, and I'll remind you as well. But everyone's doing really good, so we're working on a strong finish. Doing laminated dough this week, the croissant dough. Next week, we're going to do laminated dough puff pastry, no yeast for next week. So like I said, if you run out of yeast this week, you don't have to buy anymore. But I think that a lot of you are working on your croissants over the weekend, which is great. With these bread assignments, and even with your baking assignments, as time goes on, they can be a little unpredictable, time-wise, waiting for fermentation or even baking things or freezing things. So always try to do, have your baking assignments a priority, because when it comes to baking, things can't always be rushed. And then if you're running out of time, at least you can kind of do your other written assignments and your quizzes a little bit more quick. You have a little bit more control over them. So we always recommend doing the baking assignments first, because I heard from a couple of students like, oh, I didn't get my baking assignment done because I was working on my math on my other assignment. So try to do the baking assignments first for your classes. And I think that things will go a little bit more smooth, because like I said, they can be unpredictable at times, and this way they're all buttoned up, and then you can work on your other work. But as far as croissants, does anyone have any questions? Anyone need any help with anything so far? I know that we covered it pretty well in class, and I'm going to be available all weekend for you guys too if you need any help. So any thoughts on croissants? Are you guys excited if you haven't done them yet? It's a process. It's nothing to be worried about at all. I'm telling you, I've done like huge books of croissant that fill up like an entire sheet pan, like a whole cart full of them, like 15 full sheet pan books like at a time. So I can I'm kind of living proof that it's really not a hard thing to do. And what's nice about these laminated doughs is it's not like you're putting it in the oven and you have to watch it. You just put it in the fridge to chill, and then you can kind of do whatever you need to do in between. But as far as the process of mixing the dough, the encasing the butter, and then doing the turns, does anyone have any questions? Is anything unclear? I know when you look at that, the recipe, the formula for croissant, and it starts kind of describing, doing the folds, it's like a lot of words in there and it can be kind of confusing. So just mimic what Chef Tom is doing in the video and you'll be just fine. All right, because even I was reading that and I've made a lot of croissant in my life, and it's like, hold on, I got to read that sentence again. So it's kind of a lot of reading that the formula on the class page. It's maybe a little intimidating, but just follow all the steps that Chef Tom is going through. That video, you can stop it from place to place, and then, when you stop them, the number, the time where it is comes up, so you can write down the time and revisit that. But that's a really good starting point, to just follow that video and you'll be just fine. But you're gonna love the croissants. They're flaky and they're soft and they're just delicious, and they're full of butter. Okay, Jesse had a question. Filling a few croissants with pastry cream, do we attempt to shape them in the croissant shape or just a square? I haven't filled them with pastry cream. I usually fill my croissants with a little bit more solid things, like some almond filling made out of almond paste, or even some chocolate chips or some ham. So that's pretty loose. So with something like that, I would do kind of the roll or the fold. And what you may want to do is maybe do the roll. Have you seen like the roll that's like classic with the chocolate chip? And maybe, pipe your pastry cream in there, leave enough room on the edges, and then maybe try to seal it a little bit, pinch it, and then kind of roll it a little bit. So I'm not saying that it can't be done. It just may be a little bit trickier. So you're gonna have to pinch the dough, and maybe a little bit may come out. And that's, for me, when a little bit of filling comes out, that's like the beauty of the pastry for me. So as long as all of it doesn't come out. But yeah, let us know how that goes when we have class on Wednesday. But typically I'll use something a little bit sturdier, but yeah, it can absolutely be done. All right. Another thing that you can do, well, pastry cream is a funny one too, because it's got the cornstarch in it and we can't freeze it. So, you could even like pipe pastry cream and freeze it and then put that into the dough, but you would have to use the pastry cream that's made with gelatin as a thickener for that to work, because when we freeze pastry cream with cornstarch is not like that, and it becomes very grainy and separated. So there's a lot of different directions that you could take on that. And in 185, we talked about, prepared products before. Maybe you would want to look into one of those prepared pastry creams for something like that. Something that you could maybe freeze and like cut into a log and then put it in your croissant, and that'll kind of help it from all spreading out. So there's really a lot you can do. And you know what Chef Susie says, as long as we follow the basics, rules are meant to be broken. And that's how we come up with really cool stuff. But you want to follow the basics, the foundation, and just take notes when you're playing around with stuff like that. But yeah, I've created some pretty cool stuff by like pushing boundaries a little bit, and it's really a lot of fun. And I've had people tell me, oh, you can't do that. I'm like, you want to see me at least try it, see if it works. So yeah, what I say is, try it, and you may, come up with a solution. Okay. So Karen made a few Danish with the scraps and their chocolate chips in a pocket. Great idea. So what did you think? Did you like it, Karen? Pretty delicious once it was baked?
It was very good. I ate one of them for dinner, and I had one for lunch. And these were the best croissants I've ever eaten, because I've never had homemade croissants before, only store-bought. And
Yeah,
it's such a difference between what you get in the stores and what you make at home.
absolutely. You know, you see things on shelves and they have dates that are like for 5 or 6 days. So there's, you know, manipulation in there for sure. And yeah, something like fresh baked bread. And I really love your style, eating your baked goods for lunch and dinner. I just love it. I know, and I used to, you know, babysit the kids, like my sister's kids, and you know, and I always tell them, "Oh, you have to eat dessert first to make sure that you have room." So you can do that with other people's kids as like a fun aunt or, you know, a fun cousin, but not your own when you're teaching them about nutrition. But I love your style, I really do. But delicious, as you mentioned, there's really nothing like the flavor of a fresh baked croissant. And when it comes right out of the oven, that aroma, all those flaky layers. So you guys are going to love it. You know, it's one of these things that's well worth the labor. It definitely is. Sometimes, you know, we're going to make things that are real quick and then some things that are very labor intense. And whenever it's more labor intense, it's always worth it for sure. Well, good, good. I'm glad that you had a good experience. Anyone else make croissant yet? Are you guys waiting for the weekend? I'll be around if you need me. Don't panic on anything. It's going to go fine. So Karen, it was just like a process, right? When you did it, you know, just resting in between the rolls.
Yes. It really wasn't difficult. Just follow the directions. And I saw Chef Tom's video a couple of times when I was baking it, just to check on what he did and what I was doing to make sure I was doing it the right way. And it helped tremendously because he does explain everything so simply that if you follow it step by step, you really can't go wrong. And I found out today that the dough is very forgiving, like you always say, because I was sure I screwed up something and it came out so good. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, bread making is very forgiving, guys. It can be. Yeah, I'm happy that you enjoyed those. And yeah, like you said, just follow Chef Tom's steps. And I know when you read that recipe or the formula on the class page, you're like, oh my God, there's so much here. But just kind of follow along with him. And, you know, just a really good job at explaining it very well, too. Okay, so Jesse has 2 doughs in the fridge overnight. One is an experiment with homemade maple butter. I like that. And the other is the text recipe. So yeah, that butter, you can really flavor it. And I like to put sometimes like some garlic in there. And sometimes I'll use like a salted butter with some garlic and some parsley or something like that. So yeah, keep in mind as you explore croissant, you can start flavoring that butter along with, you know, putting, you know, different fillings in the croissant. So once you have the basics and the foundation, you can really kind of take this in so many different directions. And you can do that classic crescent shape, or you can, you know, do a roll. And there's just so many things that you can do with these doughs, but it's really good to learn the lamination process. And just make sure that barrage, that butter that you're encasing in the dough before you do that first roll, make sure that it's not cracking when you bend it, because if it's real hard when you put it in the dough, you're going to see it through the dough. You're going to see it chunk into like puzzle pieces, and it could come through the dough. And I know that because I've done it before. So just make sure that barrage, that dough is bendable. It's like clay, if you've ever played with clay at all. But if you bend it and it just bends and it's not sticking to your hands and it feels cool to the touch, then that's perfect. And if you bend it and it's cracking, just leave it set a little bit, let it come temper and at room temperature a little bit so it's more bendable. You don't want it too soft because it can squish out, but that's really a good visual for if it's ready or not. Okay. All right, guys, any other thoughts or questions before we start talking about sourdough a little bit? All right. Well, just let me know, flag me down. You can put questions in the chat, or anyone, if you have questions, you can raise your hand as well. But as far as sourdough, we didn't do sourdough for any of our assignments, but it's really a fun thing to explore. And it's really kind of like a class within its own. But I definitely recommend exploring sourdough if you're interested in it. And it's fun and it's delicious and it's beautiful. And it's another one of these things that really, it's just a process. And once you start reading about it and you learn about it, you'll realize that it's just steps that you're taking and they're not very hard, but it can be a little bit time consuming. So when I think of sourdough, of course, I think of, San Francisco sourdough. And I always think of sourdough as like an old fashioned bread. I know that bread historically has very long lines, very old origin, but I always look at sourdough as kind of like an antique bread a little bit. Maybe it's because I like antiques, but it just reminds me of like an old school bread, because a traditional sour starter is made with wild yeast. And you're like, what is wild yeast, Chef Susie? Is that like yeast coming in on a wagon train with yippee? No, it's not anything like that. But wild yeast is yeast. It's free yeast all around us, and we have yeast all around us. And depending on where we live, the yeast is going to be very different. And that's where the San Francisco sourdough, that's notorious, popular, and very well known. This is where it gets this very unique flavor from the yeast in that area. So let's say you're making sour starters and you're living in San Francisco, and then you move over to Chicago, or you move over to, New York or Maine or Montana. It's going to be distinctly different from the area that you're in. So it's very regional, the yeast in your area. So if you move, if you're making sourdough and you're used to it coming out a certain way with your natural starter, and you move, you're going to find that there is a big difference. So you may have to start from scratch again, doing some experimentation, but you may not ever get that exact flavor. Okay, so a real true natural sourdough starter is what is used for the fermentation in the sourdough bread. Okay, so we're not going to be going to the store and buying some yeast off the shelf. We're going to be kind of capturing wild yeast in our area. And that's why I think it's like an antique bread, because sour starters were made before commercial yeast was available. Okay, so in our reading in the text, we're going to read about natural sour starters and yeast starters as well. So let's talk about natural starters, because they're a little bit more complex. So a natural starter is made by just mixing flour and water and just leaving it ferment. And it usually takes a couple of days. And it's, wild yeast from within the flour and from where you live is going to start growing in that kind of batter or paste that you have. And you can help it out a little bit too. And you can, when you're making a sour starter, it kind of depends on what you're making it with too, like what kind of flour you're using. So you can help it out by using a wheat flour or a rye flour, a whole kernel wheat flour or a rye flour, because wild yeast sits on that kernel, and then when it's milled, it's going to be actually in that flour. So rye is the better out of the two if you're doing a natural starter, and rye better with like the whole kernel flour or a dark rye. The light rye is made more with the interior part of the kernel, and that wild yeast is more sitting on the outside. So the choice between the two flours, I would use rye for a natural starter first before I used wheat, and then try to get something a little bit darker or whole kernel. All right. And fruits and vegetables also have wild yeast on them, grapes in particular. So you can take your flour and your water and you can put, you know, a grape inside of it, and that's going to start some fermentation after a couple of days, and then you'll remove the grape and then you have your starter started. And starters are very unique. They are natural starters can be used for the leavening of bread, and they add flavor and texture. So if you've ever had a sourdough bread, it's very tangy and it's usually pretty moist, and that's from the starter. And in that starter, there's wild yeast growing and there's bacteria growing too, which is really important for the flavor. So the bacteria is called lactobacilli, the main bacteria, and it's producing these acids once it starts to ferment. And you have a lactic acid and you have an acidic acid from that bacteria. Okay, the lactic acid is a little bit milder, but that acidic acid is a stronger and tangy one, almost like a vinegar. So the bacteria that's growing in the starter is what's usually giving that starter that very unique flavor. So that's where the sourness comes from, the acidity. And with these natural yeasts, they can tolerate more acidity, and that's part of the beauty of the natural starter. So when you're using a commercial yeast, it can't tolerate as much acidity as a natural yeast can. So that's the beauty behind the natural starter. Okay, guys, so starter, you know, once you make it, once you get that initial fermentation, you're going to want to feed that starter, and you're going to feed it with some water and some flour, because it's going to be growing and it's going to be kind of depleting its food supply a little bit. So you have to keep it going by feeding it. And usually when you feed your starter, you're going to remove some of the starter, and then you're going to add some water and some flour for the food and some hydration for that starter. Because if you just have your starter and you're not using it yet and you just keep adding flour and water, you're going to like get a huge starter. And that's why you kind of take some away and you discard it and then you feed the starter. So that's the kind of the foundation of the starter. And like I said, it's for leavening, and it's going to add flavor and texture to your bread. And that's the beauty behind the sourdough bread, the flavor and the texture and the moistness. So in your reading, I believe it's in chapter 8, there's so much information on the sourdough and the starter, so I recommend definitely saving the reading and you know, keeping it as a resource. So let's go ahead and take a look at the starter a little bit more, that some information that's in the textbook. Okay, so hang on for a second. I kind of lost my place here a little bit. All right, guys. Yeah, I kind of moved things. I had something that I wanted to show you, but I can more tell you about it, but it is in your reading. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and we're going to go ahead and take a look at this diagram. Okay, there it is. I found it. Okay, so there's a really good diagram on page 162 in your text, and it kind of shows the starter a little bit. So let me share my screen with you, and then we'll take a look at this. Oh, hold on. All right, there we go. Sorry, Chef Susie's all over the place with her mouse at the moment. All right, here we go. All right, there. Okay. Oh, darn. I apologize, guys. All right. Okay, so can you guys see this all right? This is a diagram in your textbook, and this is a really good diagram of a thicker starter. Some starters are a little bit thicker, and then some are more thin. They're kind of like batters almost. So this is a thicker starter. So it kind of gives you a little bit of a step-by-step visual. So this is the ingredients mixed together, the rye flour and the water. And this is a little bit thicker starter. It's going to have less water in it. So once it gets started and it ferments, it's going to really get very bubbly and thick, and then it's going to drop down, and then usually takes a couple of days at room temperature, and then you're going to start feeding your starter a little bit with some water and some flour, and then you can store the starter in the refrigerator. And these thicker starters are great for storing in the refrigerator because they're fermenting slower at a cooler temperature, and they're producing more acidity. So there's a little bit of a ratio here for your starter. So a typical SIF starter under number 3 is going to be about 67%. So you have 100% water and 50 to 60%, you have 100% flour, and then you have 50 to 60% hydration water. So a thinner starter is going to be pretty much equal parts of water and flour, and that's going to be a little bit more of a batter type of a starter. All right, so there's a couple of different kinds, and like I said, with the thicker starters, that's where you're going to get more acidity because the bacteria are producing more of that acidic acid, which is the tangy one. And with the looser starters, bacteria is producing more of that, I think it's called lactic acid, and that is a little bit milder in acidity. So that's like really kind of the main difference between both of them. So the thinner starter, the battery type of a starter, that one's going to ferment quickly, and it's not going to get that deep acidic flavor to it. So just keep that in mind for what you're making, what type of a starter you would want to make. And in your text reading, there's some really good information on starters. So we were talking about natural starters so far, and there's also, there's yeast starters as well, and there's some formulas in your text for yeast starters as well. So typically a starter is used as a leavener, but oftentimes too a starter may be used as a leavener and a lot for flavor. So sometimes you'll see formulas that have the starter in them and then yeast as well. And that means that the starter is there for flavor and fermentation, but a lot more for flavor. And that's called mixed fermentation right there. So you have fermentation from a starter and you have fermentation from the yeast as well. So let's go ahead and take a look at a little bit more in our text reading. I want to just point out to you guys the pages that the natural starters are on and the pages that the yeast starters are on, and we can kind of see the difference with them. Okay, so the natural starters are going to be on page 173, and the yeast starters are going to be on page 168. Okay, so like I said, save this reading and explore this reading. It's a really good foundation for sourdough bread making. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at page 173 for the natural starters. So I'm not sure why the yeast starters are first in the text, but it can be a little bit confusing. So those are the yeast starters. We're going to pass them up, and then we are going to go to 173. I'm sorry, I don't mean to make you guys sick with this. All right, I kind of had it, set up where I had them separate, but that didn't really work out well. Okay, so this is a basic natural sourdough starter. It's got the warm water, it's got rye flour in it. In the second stage, the bread flour has been added after the initial fermentation. Then it's refreshed and fed in stage 3 with the bread flour and the water, and refreshed and started as needed. So a lot of times your starters, the thinner ones, are going to be fed every day when they're in the refrigerator, but you don't want to refrigerate them until they're actually kind of going and they're like a mature starter. And then those thicker starters, those can be fed every couple of days. Okay, so this is a basic sourdough starter. If you wanted to make a natural starter, this is a really good foundation, and it gives all of the steps here very detailed. It should take, 2 to 3 days to ferment. It's going to be a stiff dough, and you're going to add flour to it, and then you're going to refresh it with the bread flour and the water, and then you'll keep feeding it with the bread flour and the water. So it's going to be like a 2-to-1 ratio with the bread flour and the water for feeding. So this is a great basic natural starter formula from your text on page 173. All right, guys, and then there's a couple of more starters in here too. So there's a yogurt starter. I haven't ever made this one, but it's with skim milk, plain yogurt, and bread flour. So it kind of sounds kind of tangy right off the bat. Okay, and then there's an apple sour too that's made with, the apples are fermenting, and there's some sugars in here with honey, and then you're going to leave it ferment. And this one is going to take longer. It's like an 8 to 10 day ferment. So that's going to take longer for it to get going. But if you want to play around with a basic natural starter, I recommend this one at the top of page 173. So this is just a very natural starter, and it's made with rye flour, which is great for making starters because remember I mentioned all that wild yeast that's on the outside of that rye kernel. So you'll see sourdough starters, natural starters, made a lot with rye flour. Okay, so it's whole rye flour. Look for that rather than like a light rye flour because that's more from the interior. Okay, and then I did mention too the yeast starters, which are starters that are not made with wild yeast, are made with commercial yeast, and these are great. They're going to ferment quicker, and they're fun to explore as well. So those are on page 168. So we're going to go back up to 168 and look at the yeast starters. Okay, so this is 168, and these are some yeast starters. And when you see this Biga, or I'm not really sure how you say that, this is a thicker starter. And you can tell too, there's 15 ounces of flour and 9 ounces of hydration. It's a thicker starter when there's more flour. And then you're gonna go kind of down a little bit with these rye starters, and these have a little bit more hydration in them. And then the bottom rye starter has it's equal parts of water and hydration. So that's more of a thinner kind of a batter type of a starter. So with the thicker starters, oftentimes you'll have more hydration than the actual dough recipe. And like I said, the thicker starters are going to yield a more acidic flavor. So if you're working on sourdough and you're kind of working with a loose starter, a very battery type of starter, and you're not getting the tanginess that you're really looking for because you don't have a lot of that acidic acid being formed from the lactobacilli bacteria, you're going to want to try to make a thicker starter, and that's going to help produce a more tangy flavor, those more kind of vinegary acids. Okay, guys, so that's the basic difference between natural starters and yeast starters. So before we look at some formulas and then talk about shaping and baking, is everyone understanding that there are 2 different kinds of starters that you can make? Right, and kind of the basic differences. So like I said, there's yeast starters and natural starters. So if you're writing this down, the natural starters in your text are on page 173, and then the yeast starters are on page 168. So you can tell by reading them because you'll see the yeast in there, but there's not exactly a label on the pages like yeast starters or natural starters. So I just kind of wanted to clear that up because I really like the reading in this chapter on sourdoughs, but seems a little misplaced. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of the formulas, and then you can kind of have an idea of how these starters are used in the formulas. And, you know, just if you want to explore starters, you know, just pick one and try it. And what's nice about the recipes in the text is it tells you use the starter from page 170 or use the starter from page 168. So it's a little bit helpful in that way for a foundation for making sourdough bread. Okay, so let's look at some of the formulas for the natural starters. So we're going to go back to page 173. Okay, so 173 are our basic sour starters, our natural sour starters. There isn't any yeast in any of these, and there's some formulas for making breads with these right underneath the natural starters. And this is a really good one. It's just a very basic rustic sourdough bread, and it's got this one in the formula. It's got the classic lines from the mold, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. Excuse me. But this is a really good sourdough to start with if you want to explore a natural starter. And then you use the natural starter from page 173, and refreshing the starter 8 to 12 hours before you use it. Typically a starter is refreshed and it's fed before it's used, because a starter right out of the refrigerator is not really ready for bread making. So you'll see them refreshed. So this is a really good formula. It reminds you to refresh the starter 8 to 12 hours before you're using it. And this is made with some basic bread flour, some dark rye flour, some whole wheat flour, and some water. And it's just very basic. It's a good foundation for rustic sourdough making. It's like rustic sourdough bread making. Okay. And then there's a couple more recipes down here for sourdough. This is a white sourdough, and remember I mentioned mixed fermentation. This is a sourdough starter, and it also contains yeast in the formula, and it's just a different type of a formula, and it's called mixed fermentation. So don't get confused if you're using a starter and then you see yeast. It's not uncommon at all. The starter's playing a role as a leavener and a flavoring flavor enhancer as well. So that's why you'll see this, and some formulas may not say mixed fermentation, but you'll notice it right away looking at the sourdough starter, and then you'll see the yeast in here as well. All right, so just follow the steps. You've got the starter, and this one, you're adding the starter, bread flour and water to the starter, and then you're using it to make this dough. So these formulas in the text are really self-explanatory. The sourdough is typically a softer dough. It's usually wetter, and that's how it gets that soft interior. So it's a little bit harder to work with, but we've worked with wetter doughs before. So you just want to be careful that you're not over mixing these at all. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of the formulas that are made with the starters that are yeast starters. Okay, so we're going to go up to 168. And I hope this is helping kind of sorting it out for you guys. So these are basic yeast starters here, and there's a rye one as well, and there's the thicker starter too. And these are some formulas down here with the yeast starter. So you'll see use the fermented yeast starter, the rice starter #1 from page 168. So they're giving you like 6 different starters in the text and some formulas that you can use with them as well. So I would kind of check it out and, you know, pick one of the, maybe the bread recipes and then make the starter from that one, or pick a starter and then find a recipe as well. So you're really, you know, mixing them using the basic method that we've been using. All right. And you're going to do, you know, fermentations as well. All right. And here's a pumpernickel one for the rye starter one on 168. All right, guys. So, in the mixing method here, there's a note, don't overmix. So be careful that you're not overmixing. So you're going to ferment these for about 30 minutes, most of them, and then you're going to do your makeup. All right, so just be careful that you're not overmixing. These are a little bit more delicate. So when it comes to fermenting sourdough breads, it's going to be a little bit different than we have done so far. All right, so the fermentation, usually with fermentation, we've been fermenting at about 77, 80 degrees, even 82 degrees. So with fermentation for sourdough, you want it to be cooler, okay? So put this in a cooler place in your kitchen, like, you know, 72, 75, even 68 degrees. Those are great room temperatures to proof sourdough at, because the lower the temperature, the more of the acidic flavor that's going to be formed. So that's really what you want. So, you know, we've been telling you all along in all of your assignments, you know, find a little warm place in your kitchen to do the, you know, the fermentation of your bread so they ferment nicely. So sourdough, you're going to want to find a cool spot in your kitchen. Like I said, 8 degrees is a great temperature for fermentation after you do your shaping. All right, so these are lower temperatures. It's going to take longer. It could take up to 3 to 4 hours to ferment these loaves of sourdough bread. Okay, guys, so sometimes bakeries, they'll form their loaves of sourdough and they'll leave them almost overnight if the bakery is nice and cool, and then they'll come and bake them in the morning. So you're going to want to take some notes on this, guys, with the fermentation, but cooler, it's going to take longer. All right, and you want it cooler for sourdough so that flavor comes out even more. So find a cool place. Like I said, 68 degrees is a great place. If you have, you know, like a little table in your kitchen and it's near like a window and it's cold outside and it's cool over there, that's a really good place to ferment sourdough. You wouldn't want to put it on the counter next to the stove and oven where it's really warm, where we've been kind of telling you to put all of your other dough so far. This one, find a little cool place for it and just kind of leave it work on its own, and it's going to take longer to ferment. And with the sourdough too, underproof it a little bit. It's better if you underproof this one a little bit. So in, you know, we've been telling you so far, you know, fermentation almost double in size, you know, about 3/4. With the sourdough, go even less with that. Is going to help with that chewiness. All right, so these are some really key things once you do your starter, once you do your mixing, and once you do your shaping. Okay, and as far as shaping, we have you know, that special kind of bowl that the sourdough can be put in. So let's go ahead and take a look at that real quick, and then I've got a quick video. Remember a long time ago we were talking about like shaping and smoothing out our dough, and I think it was Jake or something like that. They had the cute video showing the rounding. Well, he has another cute video that I want to show you guys. So if you don't like him, I'm sorry, but it really gets the point across well. So let me share my screen with you guys really quick, and we're going to take a look at the batten for baking the sourdough bread. Oh, what did I do with it? Where'd it go? I can't. Okay, here it is. All right. And yeah, let's go ahead and take a look at this. And these are perfect. You don't have to use this, but these are really perfect for baking sourdough bread. So it's a basket. It's a batten basket. That's what it's called. It comes with a little liner. And then we have, I think it's Jake. He's going to tell you a little bit about this. So let me pull up this video with him and we'll take a look at this real quick. Can you guys see that okay? Oh, you know what? I'm gonna stop sharing. Hold on a second. And I'm gonna share my sound so you can hear him a little bit better. Okay, there we go. All right, guys, let's go ahead and take a look at this and he explains it a little bit better.
Baskets. Okay, so what is a banneton? Right, a banneton is this, or you can call it a proven basket, or you can call it a banneton basket. That's what I call it. It's this, basically. Essentially, it's a basket. It's just a little basket made out of cane, and this is what we use to prove breads in. Now, this comes in really handy with sourdoughs and really wet doughs and stuff like that, because it provides a bit of support in the proving stage of your loaf. If you want to make a round loaf, for this one example, you build the tension in the other video I did ages ago. I'll link it up here if you didn't see it, or put it underneath. You build the tension in the loaf and put it inside here, upside down with the seam side on the top. And then when it comes to baking, it proves up in here, having all the support of the basket so it doesn't spread. You flip it upside down onto a tray and you bake it either on a hot stone or on the tray that it's on, right? So it just provides support along the way. Now you can get these in lots of different shapes. This one is a round one, obviously, because it's round. You get a short one like this. These are quite nice as well. Nice. And this is also how you get the lines on the dough and the spirals in that round one, if you saw that. You get the spirals too. That's awesome on the outside. And also, long one like that. Now you get these all shapes and sizes. You get a ring one. That's really cool. I really want one of those ring ones with a little thing in the middle to keep it nice like a ring. You get a triangular one. I think that's a little bit weird. But you get them all different shapes and sizes. When they arrive, they should come with a little hat like this. It's a little shower cap sort of thing made out of cloth. So what you can do is dust your loaf nicely, dust your basket nicely, and rest it in the basket upside down. You can either do it on the actual wood so you get the nice markings, or, one sec, or you can put the cloth inside like this and rest it on the cloth, and then you get a bit of a different look, but you've still got to dust the cloth. What I like to do is rest it inside of the basket on the wood, actually directly on the wood, and then I put the little hattie on top like that just to cover it over. That's quite nice. I quite like that. Now you don't have to use this exclusively for wet doughs, high hydration doughs. You can make normal loaves of bread and pop it in one of these bad boys. And then just when you get that really nice look, you get the little swells in the dough and you get like the stripes or whatever. You can do it with a straight dough, and I quite like to do that too. But
okay, guys, so that gives you a little bit of an idea, and I'll put this link up in the class page too. So the banneton that's typically used for sourdough, it really kind of helps hold its shape while it's actually proofing. And then you can get those really pretty lines on it. So if you've ever seen sourdough and you're wondering what those little ridges are from, that's from the banneton. But you don't need one to bake it. Some people put their sourdough right like in a Dutch oven, one of those Dutch oven casseroles that you can put right in the oven, and they'll bake their sourdough right in there. And I've seen that where they're greased, or I've even seen it, you know, on a parchment kind of coming out a little bit. So you don't really need any fancy equipment to make your sourdough. So once you shape your sourdough, whether you're using the banneton or using a Dutch oven, you're going to leave it proof. You're going to underproof it, and then you're going to bake it at a high temperature with steam. All right, so the sourdough bread is often, you know, they're called hearth breads because they're baked on a hearth, which is the deck in the oven, very hot place. So if, you know, we don't have those in our kitchen. So if you have a pizza stone, that's really good to bake these on. I wouldn't bake them on just a regular sheet pan. If you have a pan that's kind of perforated, I have a old pizza pan that I use. It's kind of has a textured bottom to it, so I'll bake my breads on that. So if you have something like that, use it before the sheet pan, but if you only have a sheet pan, absolutely use that. So a pizza stone is great as well. All right, so the sourdoughs, one of the beautiful parts of the sourdough is not only the flavor, but the decorative crust that you can make with it too. It turns, deep brown color. You're baking at a higher temperature, like 400, 425. You'll see 450 sometimes too. Bake this one at a higher temperature. And then you could take a sharp knife or a razor blade and you could make some, decorative slits on it. And what's really nice about the sourdough is those slits really open up, and it's just the beauty of the bread. Some people will use stencils as well to dust flour on the top for something a little bit more decorative, but you can get super artistic with the sourdough bread. All right, so once it's proofed before it goes in the oven. If you're using the Banneton, you're going to invert it. And at this point, this is when you would do those markings right before it goes in the oven. And you don't have to do a lot. You could just do a couple of slits, and it just really beautifies the bread. It adds some texture and it opens it up and makes it so beautiful. You're going to bake with steam for the first 15 minutes because you want to keep the exterior of the crust soft so it doesn't like crack and bake. Okay, so the first 15 minutes. So I found a video, and I think it's from King Arthur, and it kind of shows how to move the bread onto the stone in your oven if you have a pizza stone, and it shows putting some water in there too. So I just want to show you guys this really quick so you can kind of get a visual on how you would move this. All right, let me go ahead and share my screen, and I'll put this up in the Class Cafe for you guys too. All right. Okay. All right, I think this is from King Arthur. Yeah, it's from King Arthur. So she's got her oven preheated with her stone in here, and then she has a cast iron pan. You can use a deep cake pan. You can put water in there. I'll put ice in there sometimes too, but you want steaming for like the first 15 minutes because it's going to help that crust kind of keep it soft, and it's really going to help it out so it doesn't, really crack on you. Okay.
It takes about 45 minutes for the breads to bake, but they're going to be gorgeous at the end of that time.
And she had the bread on a piece of parchment, and she used, that's called an oven peel, which she was using. But if you have it like on the back of a sheet pan, you can like easily pull that parchment, pull the bread by the parchment onto that stone. So you can actually bake on the stone with the bread on parchment. That's probably the easiest way to move it over there. Like that loaf, it's so soft. It's such a soft dough, and such a wet dough that you wouldn't be able to actually move the loaf itself by picking it up, or even like with a pancake turner onto that stone. So it's better to have it on that parchment and just use that to slide it around, if that makes any sense. If you're moving it onto a stone, that's the easiest way to do it. So I'll put that video up in the Class Cafe. So do you guys have any questions? I know I'm giving you a lot of information, and I was talking about terms about bacteria and stuff, and I hope I didn't scare you away, but I just kind of wanted to go through all the information that's in your text reading, and everything that you need to know about sourdough is pretty much right there in sourdough starters. All right, so starters are pre-ferments, and we did a little bit of pre-fermentation in week 5 when you guys did your original bread, and we recommended doing the ciabatta in chapter 8, and that was a sponge, and it's really similar to a starter, but it's a little bit of a a quicker pre-ferment. So the sponge that we made when we did the ciabatta was, loose kind of battery type of a sponge, and it fermented for about 3 or 4 hours until it doubled in size, depending on the warmth in your kitchen. And then it was ready to go right in the dough. And it added some texture to your dough and some moisture, and it also added some flavor as well. So that's kind of the beginning of sponges. And then these starters are kind of a little bit more complex sponges that have more complex flavors to them, and they benefit the dough, helping with the hydration and the softness. And the more hydration you have in your bread, the longer the shelf life is going to be too. It's not going to dry out on you. So sourdough breads are really fun. I have a link for some really pretty sourdough bread pictures, and I'll put it up in the chat. But let's go ahead and take a look at some sourdough bread pictures just to get an idea of how decorative they can be. And you guys can just Google sourdough bread, and you'll see so many different variations. So you'll see the open crumb, and this is because of all the moistness in the dough. And then you'll see some decorative things like this, and this is just this is cut here, and there were some little bit deeper slashes, and then these are slashes that opened up, and they were probably just very little when they were cut and they opened in the oven. So this bread was dusted with flour, and then when these cuts opened up, they kind of exposed the brownness of the bread, and then the flour was still there too. So you can do some really good things, really pretty things. And this is just very basic. So you have the Banneton marks, and then you just have some slitting, and see how beautiful that is. And this is a really nice variety for any bakery bread display. So round is usually popular, but you saw Jake showed some different shapes and sizes of those Bannetons that you can buy. So this is showing a lot of the interior crumb, and there's some some etching that you could do. And this one has a little bit of oat on it. Looks like we have a little bit of sesame. You can add seeds on these as well. So these doughs are tacky. They're going to hold different kind of inclusions on the top. And then this is one that's made in a Dutch oven. So you can absolutely, if you have a Dutch oven or a casserole like this, you can bake your sourdough. And these, a lot of people do that as well. And then you don't have to, get a Banneton for the shaping. And you could also, the Banneton is really beautiful. It gives you the ridging, but you could do that in just a regular bowl as well. The round shape, you could put a towel in there so it doesn't stick. So a lot that you can do. And then there's this Instagram post that I wanted to show you, and I'll put this link up in the class page if anyone follows Instagram. But she does some really neat things. Oh, it looks like you have to have an account to continue. Let me see if I can kind of get it up there again. So yeah, I don't think I have an Instagram account. I'm not sure. All right, so okay. So she does some really decorative things with sourdough. So she does some stenciling with flour, and she does some really decorative, beautiful things. These are some seeds on top of this one. So I'll put the link up in the chat. So this is kind of a fun little site to see. And so she's got, some cuttings and kind of almost geometric here, real thin, and then it opened up a little bit. This one is very basic with just some slits made, and then this is some stenciling as well. So you can find some stencils, at the craft store to use for things like this, and it's just flour stenciled on these. And I'm not sure how long it's going to let us look at this, but here's a pumpkin one too with the spider. So this is a really creative sourdough bread. So I like this one. This is a before and after shot. So you can kind of see that she did some etching, and then there's some stenciling as well. So there's a combination of both. So if you're looking at pictures and you're trying to, kind of figure out how someone did the decorative top, I can help you. But usually usually if you see some marking that doesn't look like it moved at all, that's usually a stencil. And then if it opened up, that's kind of an etching a little bit. So let me put this link up in the chat. And yeah, this is Instagram link for this lady that does some really artistic things with sourdough. And I'll put that up in the class cafe as well. But I know I've been giving you guys a lot of information, just chatting about sourdough. So how do you guys feel about sourdough? Does it make a little bit more sense now after talking about it tonight a little bit? Oh, everyone's quiet. Nope. All right, you guys okay with the foundation on sourdough bread making? All right, Jesse. Yeah,
Yes.
everyone. Okay, good, good. Well, when we get together, you know, again next week in the special live session, we could talk about sourdough a little bit more. So if you guys are thinking about doing sourdough or starters, or if you started one, if you have any questions, just let me know. But there's some really great information in chapter 8 in your text. So I would kind of turn to that, and then that's going to give you an understanding, and then you can explore sourdough a little bit more. All right, guys. So any thoughts or questions on anything before we say our goodbyes? Oh, time went by so fast tonight. Hi, Linda, you got your hand up?
When is the last date? When is the last final day we could take the final?
Class ends on December 17th. So everything is going to December 17th, Tuesday at 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time. So class will close at that time. Everything will be closed. And then Wednesday, Chef Jason and I are going to spend the entire day processing the grades for you guys. So you have to have everything in by Tuesday. So I recommend doing things early just in case. I mean, it happens
Okay.
in my house all the time. I don't know if I told you guys or not, but I went to do something the other night and I kind of had to get it done, you know, for school. And I like timed my day out and I had a plan that I was going to, you know, do it at a certain time. And I'm not kidding you. I walked in my kitchen and I started getting everything ready and my power went out. And it just, you know, yeah. And we don't lose power often, and it wasn't storming or anything. So my power went out. So not only did I have that to contend with, but I have an elderly aunt that lives on my street, and she's, you know, on oxygen and stuff. So I had to like leave my house, get a flashlight, and run over to her house. And then we found out that there was an accident like up the street, and it like knocked out the power for like the whole like neighborhood and street. So I mean, it happened to me just, you know, last week or something. So it can happen so quickly, and things like that happen, you know, at the very worst time. So try to get everything done early. And then, you know, the final exam, you have multiple attempts on it too. So keep in mind, you could take it again for a better grade, but make sure that you guys mark it on your calendar. Everything has to be in and completed by Tuesday, December 17th. So then you guys will start your winter break, and then you'll come back on January the 8th, and then you'll have the next class.
Have you found out who the teacher might be?
I don't know, and I'm not sure who your next class, what your next class is. I will.
I think it's contemporary pastry art.
Is it contemporary pastry arts?
Yeah.
I'm going to double check on that, and then I'll let you guys know. How does that sound? I'll put it up in the cafe for you. All right.
Yeah,
I'm
you.
sorry about that. All right, the next
Thank you.
instructor. All right. Can you tell I don't want to see you guys go? I know. My husband's like, why are you pouting? No. He calls it, my husband calls it the French girl pout, because my mom's French. So I have French roots from my mom's side, and he calls it the French girl pout. I guess some classic thing that I'm not really aware of, but yeah, I'll miss you guys, but you're going to do great. And I'll be around if you, you know, want to be in touch. Let me know what you're doing. I would love to hear from you guys. Okay. All right, so I'll put the links from today up in the class cafe, and then I'll put your next class and your instructor up there too. Okay. All right, and then Cecilia asked about graduation, and I didn't hear back about that, so I'll let you know when I hear back about that. All right, guys. Okay, I will be in touch, and you guys contact me if you need me over the weekend, okay? All right, guys, thanks for coming out. It was great to see everyone. Keep in mind our last special live session is going to be next week, the 13th, because the following one is the 20th, and then they're shutting down the site over a winter break so they can do maintenance on it. That's when they usually do their maintenance at that time of year. All right, guys, so you guys have a good weekend. You know, think about sourdough and let me know if you have any questions or if you need any help. And then I'm going to put up an extra credit assignment in the bottom of the class page, and that can be any bread that you want that we haven't done in class so far. And it could be something that you make all the time that you want to share, okay? So that would be nice. I love seeing your work. All right, guys, you're doing great, and we'll work on a strong finish and be in touch if you need me, okay? All right, goodbye, guys. Take care. Good to see everyone tonight.